There is hope for Africa, but the continent has to do more in the areas of capacity building, transformative leadership, and the development of the right mindset if the cup, which is now half full, is to overflow. Professor Emmanuel Nnadozie, Executive Secretary, African Capacity Building Foundation. Hello everyone, welcome to Rebuild Africa, the podcast where we discuss issues related to development across the African continent with the goal of creating practical solutions and actionable strategies and principles to drive the growth of motherland Africa. On this episode of the show, we'll be looking at why Rebuild Africa. Why Rebuild Africa? Discussing the reason behind the title of the podcast, Rebuild Africa. Why that name, Rebuild Africa? And also we'll be looking at, was Africa ever great? Where we are going to look at the debates that have been going on, on both sides. Some people saying Africa was a great continent, a continent of great kingdoms before the invasion by the colonial masters, while some people are saying no, Africa was really not great, and that we should just be talking about how to develop continents or the nations that make the African continent. We are going to be looking at that, and then finally we'll be looking at Africa will be great again, and that is a very affirmative statement about what I think about the status or about the destiny of the African continent. So first, why Rebuild Africa? And I have to say that I am looking at this on this very first episode as a way of laying a solid foundation for this podcast. Every good thing, everything that will be great begins with a why. The purpose, the driving force, the passion behind that action. And so it is important for us to understand the driving force, the passion, the motivation behind this podcast, Rebuild Africa, so that everyone that comes in contact with this podcast can actually understand what is expected of them, as a part, for them to understand their role in this, their role as audience in this podcast. Why Rebuild Africa? The very first reason is because Africa, or Rebuild Africa, is the title of my latest book, which I'm still working on, by the way. Rebuild Africa, Actionable Strategies for Making Africa Great Again. I have been thinking about how to solve the problem of, the certain limitations with books. One of which is the fact that most of the time, you don't get to engage your readers when you write a book. As an author, you sit down somewhere, you have these ideas. Sometimes you may be able to talk to people, but when you write this book, the reader will have to pick the book, read, and most of the time, whatever they think of your book is just their thoughts. That is all. But I was thinking of how I will make this book to be of greater impact, considering the fact that an underlying purpose, a significant underlying purpose of writing that book in the first instance is, to move away from the usual talks about Africa. Talk, and to find a way to get people to begin to take steps, because that is what we need, to begin to action and not talk. And so I was thinking, how can I engage people? How can I get my readers, how can I get them engaged? How can we engage in conversations, around this topic of the development of Africa? And so when I came across the Anchor app and the possibility of a podcast, yes, it sparked something inside of me. I said, this is what I've been looking for. Now, even before the book goes out, we can begin to talk, or rather I can begin, to engage interested people everywhere in conversation about Africa. Some of some of the ideas that I will be able to get from this may even form part of what we go into the book, because I love to do things, including writing, that my readers can connect with, And so I said it would be a very good thing to be able to talk to people about this idea of rebuilding Africa, even before the book is published. And of course, post-publishing, we'll be able to continue this conversation. It's not going to be a reader reading the book and dropping it somewhere, forming their opinion as to whether the book is a good one or is not a good one. No, I want us to continue. I want to be able to continue. I want the conversation about the development of Africa to be something that continues. And I want it to be in a progressive manner, not the usual complaining and, the things that people, when you listen to some discussion about Africa and its development, you get very sad, very depressed. And so in order to be able, to control that conversation in a way, I believe that a podcast will be a very good thing. And so this is the very basic reason behind starting this podcast, Rebuild Africa, to get my ideas or the ideas in my book across to wider audience. Some of them, some people, I know definitely some who listen to podcasts might not be, avid fans of books. And so this is a platform to get them engaged in this conversation and also to continue to, this discussion about the development of Africa. Now, a second reason, which is something I have hinted about, is to actually, get the focus of people talking about Africa, to get their focus from mere talking and complaining and murmuring to actually taking steps, practical steps, to looking at solutions and working with the information that we have to actually create the Africa that we want. To be honest with you, if talks alone is what is needed to build a great nation, the nations of Africa will be the greatest anywhere, because Africans talk about the problem of Africa. But unfortunately, that is not the solution. The solution is to actually begin to act. But then again, you want to act. How do you act? What steps do you take? If you go on Twitter, if you go on Facebook, most of the social media, you find out that most Africans, especially young people, are talking about these issues. They are asking the question, how do we get Africa out of this mess and make Africa a continent that we can be proud of as our citizens? A lot of Africans are tired of what is happening. Bad governance, corrupt politicians, ineffective leadership or leaders, so many problems. And people are saying, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And this is part of the reason, another reason for starting this podcast and giving it that name, Rebuild. We are going to build again. We are not going to talk about it. We are not going to come up with theories. We are going to come up with actions that we can take to ensure that we drive Africa. As a matter of fact, what I want is to be able to contribute my own quota, to getting Africans from the back seat, of the development of Africa, where we complain, where we act as victims, and actually, get on the driver's seat, where we take our destinies in our own hands, where we no longer feel like victims in our own countries, wherever that is within Africa, but where we begin to take our destinies into our own hands. But in order for us to do that, we must know where we are going. We must know how to drive. We must know the road. We must understand, the dynamics of getting from the point where we are, to getting to where we want to go. And this is what we are trying to do with this show, Rebuild Africa. That is the reason why this show was given that name, Rebuild Africa. And this takes us to the second issue we are going to discuss. Was Africa ever great? Because when you talk about rebuilding, this is something that implies that there was something that was built and then was broken, and now you want to make it work again. Was Africa ever great? And to that, I will say an affirmative, sound yes. Africa was great. The only thing is that for a lot of people, we did not understand greatness, in the way that Africa was great. And this has been a major challenge with Africa. We are always looking at things. We are always seeing things from the eyes of the Western world. Greatness was defined for us by those who colonized us, who made us feel that we were inadequate in our own land, that we needed them for us to become adequate. And so we felt incomplete. We felt like we were somehow behind the rest of the world. But this is not true. This is very far from the truth. The kingdoms of Africa, because most African societies, were practicing the monarch system of government. Most kingdoms in Africa actually built great kingdoms and empires. The societies had their own system of government. The societies have their own rules, their own laws. They have their own ways of coping with the challenges of life, environmental, social, and what have you. But then all of a sudden, we began to think that these were not enough. It has to be the way that the people from Europe and America and other places define greatness for us. Now, if you want to look at it this way, it is very easy for you to conclude that Africa was never a great continent. It's very easy for you to subscribe to the school of thought that Africa has not even begun the process of development. But then again, now, if you begin to look at countries of Africa like Egypt, that even in Bible times were already great world powers. They had monuments. They discovered way of, preserving the dead, of embalming the dead. These then were great feats. Some of the things that you discover when you study the history of Africa, some of the things that some of the the scientific feats of Africa were missing even in the so-called developed world of today. And I'm not saying this as a way or as a feel-good, to create a feel-good emotion about Africa. No, I'm talking about practical. What has been scientifically proven. We were organized in such a way that if Africa had continued to grow the way we were growing, today we would have been the envy of the world. There were a lot of things we didn't have in Africa, no doubt about that. But you see, for example, if you talk about development, one of the issues we talk about is security. Take the issue of security, for example. Everyone who grew up in Africa, everyone, even if you are not old enough, you would have heard this story. That there was a time, take, for example, Nigeria, the country from which you are hearing this now. There was a time, and I'm not talking about some olden times. I'm talking about just decades ago, 1960s, 1970s, where you park your car on a highway. If you are traveling and your car developed a fault and you park the car by the side of the road on a highway and you go back, travel back home, 2-3 days, the car will be there and no one will break into that car. Now, that is security. What is the purpose of security? Someone will say, it is true, at that time, we did not have sophisticated weapons. We did not have CCTVs. We did not have so many, security agents. But at the end of the day, what is the purpose of all the security agents? What is the purpose of CCTV cameras? What is the purpose of ammunition and sophisticated, security gadgets? It is to secure life and property. Now, if you can secure life and property without necessarily buying those things, you have actually accomplished something beyond what those who are buying those things have accomplished. In his book, The Art of War, Sun Tzu said, that the best war is the war that you never had to fight, because wars are expensive. You know how much countries are spending on securing lives and properties today? Money, dollars, pounds that could have been spent, to actually meet the needs of human beings who live within those societies. Those monies are being spent to take care of robots. Those monies are being spent to design computers and feed them. And so today we have supercomputers, we talk about all of these things. They sound, impressive when you talk about them. But what will have been amazing, what will have been awesome, is if the societies of the world, the government of the world, can find ways to actually reduce crime and not to be fighting crime. Fighting crime is actually more expensive than preventing crime. And in a way, African societies found a way, in their own wisdom then, to secure the properties and the lives of the citizens of their country without actually investing in expensive security gadgets. This was a time when Africans were contented people. It was a time when the spirit, the evil spirit of materialism, and unnecessary riches was not present in Africa. When people didn't have to build estates and mansions to feel like somebody. When children of the poor, in so to say, and the middle class will sit down together. I'm talking about, I'm just in my 40s, and I'm talking about what I experienced as a child growing up in Africa at a time where my father then had a block of flats, and I know those who did not have, those who are actually staying in what we call, face me and face you. That these are one room, single room apartments. I don't know how to describe that anyway. Those who might not have experienced this, but then in the evening time, we will all sit together and tell ourselves folklores, and we play together sometimes till very late, 8, 9 p.m. before we go to sleep. There was no discrimination between the children of the rich and the children of the poor, because it was not a thing in Africa. We had morals then. Money was not, was not a god in Africa as it were now. People, as a matter of fact, in those days in Africa, if in Nigeria, and I know many parts of Africa, if you have a neighbor that suddenly grows rich and you cannot ascertain the source of their wealth, people begin to avoid such people. Not like now, when nobody cares how you make your money. If you have that money, all of a sudden you become a celebrity, because we bought into that evil of materialism. It wasn't in Africa. And so because of that, a man who can eat 3 or 2 square meals in his house did not have to carry guns to break into the homes of others. As long as you can eat and your children can eat, you are okay. You didn't need to have 3 cars to feel like somebody. Having the need to have material things to feel like somebody is actually, is actually a form of, emotional immaturity. It means that you are actually, there's a term that they use now, inferiority complex. It means you suffer. Inferiority complex was not a thing. We had to go to school, to go to university to understand what is called inferiority complex. It was not a thing in Africa, because even though, of course, in every society you have those who are so rich that they think that, but it was not so pronounced in Africa. It was not so pronounced. As long as you can work, whether you're a farmer, whatever you are, and you can feed your family, to hell with anybody's wealth. That was greatness, but we thought we didn't have greatness. We thought we were not great because we were looking to the Western world to define greatness for us. We were happy, but they told us we could not be happy if we didn't have tons of money in our wardrobes, and we bought into that. And so we became a people, gradually we began to lose what we had. I'll tell you something. There is a family friend of ours who in the early 70s and thereabout was privileged to be traveling out of the country to different countries of the world. And I remember the day she was telling me, and I think, some other kids in the neighborhood then, about her experience those years when she was traveling. And she said, we always talk about this issue of Africa, where we were. And she was saying, look, today, Americans, what I'm saying, I'm talking about 20, 30 years ago now. She said today, people struggle to get visa to travel out of the country. She said, but do you know there was a time when, there was a time when you travel out of your country, you travel to countries like America, you are practically being worshipped. Like she said, right from the airport, you see Americans, Europeans staring at you, coming to you. You see the awe on their faces when they ask you, are you from Nigeria? Are you from? She said, yes. And she said, they marvel. So you are from that great country? I'm talking about a time when a naira was equal to a pound sterling and more and stronger than a dollar, than an American dollar. A time when, the economy was growing, people were feeding, crime was almost non-existent. And people will be wondering, they said they will be wondering. They look at you, they want to, as in, that was a time when you travel out, you go to America, you go to Europe, as an African, you are treated with respect. There was that time. If that was not greatness, compared to what we have now, where people die across the sea, where people die in deserts, just trying to escape to Europe. The same Europe that Africans didn't even want to go to because they were so contented in their own country, because they were okay in their own country. The same America that I had friends who were citizens of America, and yet their parents, decided to bring them back to Nigeria, and they didn't even want to go back to America. And I realized the time when they started talking about the issue of, well, I think we had to go back now, when things started, when the confusion started to begin. There was a time when even people who had the privilege to travel out did not want, there was no need for them to travel out. There was no need for them to travel out. They not only, it's not as if they were just so it's the fact that the country was okay. The people didn't have any reason. The people could feed. Both parents could be teachers. Both of your parents could be teachers, and they will still be able to take care of you, their children. And I'm talking about, the days when parents, will have 6, 7, 10 kids, and they will still be able to take care of them. I'm talking about the time I remember, when I came from just an average family, but I remember that growing up, there was a time when my parents would have up to between 10 and 15 children every time in our house, every time, everywhere we lived. And the children of my own parents my siblings were just about 6 or 7 of us. Others, are relatives, 10 to 15. And I knew a time also when it was difficult for my parents just to take care of 2 or 3 of us staying at home, while others, have grown up, married. When you compare the difference between a time when a teacher could keep 15 kids in their home and feed them, and a time when they can no longer take care of 3 kids of their own, what happened? Then you understand that what we need to do is not to build Africa. Africa was built and was broken. What we need to do is to rebuild. Yes, when you rebuild, definitely you don't rebuild to go back to the past. You rebuild, futuristically. You look at the future to make even what was broke. You want to make what you build to be better than what existed. So I'm not saying that, yes, we should go back to the days where Africa, no. There are definitely times when we didn't have certain things. But I'm saying that there was actually a time when you can walk and hold your head up high and raise your shoulders so high, being an African. There was that time actually. It is not what we have today, where America will even be denying the government, I don't know, where people, where it is a privilege for you to travel out. There was a time when you travel out of the country, it's your loss. Because Africans were enjoying Africa. The people at home were enjoying. So it's your loss, actually, if you travel. Because you are the one missing the fun at home. Yes, that was a time. And I know now that some people will be quick to remind me about, the dark era. What they will want to call the dark era in Africa. I'm talking about now before, before the amalgamation, for example, of Nigeria, before the colonization of the African countries by the Europeans, the time when we had kings, and the kings were ruling over the subjects, and of course we had so many challenges then too in Africa, within these kingdoms and territories and empires. There were so many challenges. There were the time of when there were no scientific, cure, no modern medicine to fight malaria and all, and there were so many challenges then. Agreed. But then I will ask you, even in this time, this so-called modern time, tell me, is there a country in the world where you don't have challenges? Even in the so-called developed countries of the world. Can you tell me there is at a time where any country of the world is not without their own challenges? Today in America, do you know the number of homeless citizens of America? People who lost their homes, people who sleep on the streets. And now I can tell you that this time that I was talking about, that some people will be making reference to in the history of Africa, there were no homeless Africans. There were no people who could not afford where to sleep. Those places might not be mansions. Those places might not be estates. Those places might be huts. But the people were contented living there. They didn't know what obtained in other places. They were okay living in those huts, and they were happy. So there is no to say there was a time, those times were bad times for Africa, yes. But there have always been, and there will always be bad times for every continent and every country of every continent on earth at every point in time. There have been, there are now, and there will be bad times. So yes, Africa had its bad times, but yes, those times Africa was still able to attain greatness, like Egypt that I made mention of, and so many other African countries. You read the history of Africa, you see the things that Africans were able to accomplish in their own countries. So, yes, Africa was great at a time, and yes, Africa has lost a lot of the things that made her great. Some of them stolen by the colonial masters. A lot of our, a lot of the records of our heritage as Africans, either in artifacts or even history, recorded history, the misinformation that has been going on for long, stolen or caused by our colonial masters. But then again, a lot of this, the the breaking down of Africa's greatness was caused by Africans themselves, at least after colonization, after independence. You see a lot of African leaders now who have bought into the greed and the materialism of the colonial masters, who begin to now, to now, they have gotten to a level of madness, of crazed. It's just pure madness, insanity. People stealing money and keeping them, in soccer ways. People stealing money and building homes just to hoard stolen money. It's crazy. And so we need to now begin to say, in these modern times, how do we rebuild Africa so that we have to regain some of the things that we lost? Yes, because part of our culture too is what was lost, which we must be able to rebuild, because culture is part of development. But then again, in the areas of, science and technology, we need to also begin to think of ways to build Africa to be at par, or to even be better than the rest of the world. And so we talk about, and yes, finally, Africa will be great again. Africa will be great again. And like I said, this is not something that is said to make anybody feel good. I don't like making people feel good. I like to tell the truth. If you have been conversant with some of my work, my writings, and especially in recent times, you know that if you see some of my social media this night, I talk about truth, wisdom, and the mindset. I describe these as the three pillars of my work and my own life. That you know the truth will set you free. If you follow what you know about the truth, if you practice the truth, you become wise. And wisdom at any time will make a person great. And then, of course, you need to have the right mindset in order for you, to be free from the noise and the lies that flying around everywhere. Your perspective actually determines how happy you are, how you deal with the issues of life, how you cope with the challenges of living, whether you are a person or you're a group of persons, whether you're a company, whether you're a team, or you are a nation, whether you're a society. You need to have the right mindset collectively now for a nation, and you need to know your truth, and you need to be able to apply, the principles wisely in order for you to be able to survive and for you to be able to actually thrive in these, modern times. And so I am not saying this to make people feel good. I'm saying this because it is a fact. When you look at what is happening globally now, you need to be able to, to take a little break from everything that is happening and study history. I'm not saying history, I'm not talking about the boring aspect of history. I'm talking about, progressive history. Go and study history historically and look at what has been happening. And we are going to be looking at this, in the next episodes of this podcast. But if you just take a quick look, a glimpse at what is happening, you discover that even in the cycle of things, the whole world right now is looking towards Africa. There are things now that you might be taking for granted. Take Africa's music, for example. I know there was a time, as a matter of fact, a very, popular Nigerian and very successful, as a matter of probably who I can call, the godfather of DJing in Nigeria, will tell you about a time that he was at a party, and for the fact that he played one Nigerian song in the midst of the American and foreign songs that he was playing, somebody actually pulled a knife on him because he played a Nigerian song. There was that time. And now you go to a party, you go anywhere, You won't even get to hear any song from outside Nigeria or outside Africa. And it is like that in many African countries. Africans now are beginning to take pride, for example, in their own music, even though we have modernized this. But then you see we are beginning to like the sound of our own voice and the sound of our own sound. You also look at the way that Africa's music has foraged into almost every other country. Take, for example, what I would like to make the theme song for this podcast, the Jerusalem music that has become a global hit. And look at what that song is doing. And it is the same with most of the hit songs coming out of you. Now you have African songs actually making the global hits record. Billboards, you see Nigerian song, you see African song on billboards, American billboards, and everywhere. You see our movies are being played everywhere. You see Africans in different fields in Africa, not just even Africans as in Africans who migrated from Africa to other parts of the world, even Black people everywhere who have their roots in Africa, like the Black Americans, and you see the way they are making. You see how Africans are being celebrated everywhere, and you look at the trend now. You just see what is happening. If you can feel what is happening in the air, you know that Africa is on the rise. You know that the whole world is looking to Africa right now. And let me tell you something. I don't want to go too biblical now, but let me tell you something. That the prophetically, Africa is the next big thing, even prophetically, that is happening to the world. And if you don't like that, look at what is happening practically. Look at what is happening scientifically. You will discover that the world now is at a stage where everyone is looking to Africa. And don't be surprised at what you will see that will be coming out of Africa in the next decades. As we begin to witness these things, you get to realize that there is something that is happening. Now, you can Google this. There are five major indicators of a superpower. 5 major indicators of a superpower. When a nation or an empire or a kingdom is to be categorized as a superpower, there are 5 major indicators that are used for this category or this categorization. And then you discover when you look that Africa, through majority of its country, already has 4 of these major indicators of what makes a superpower. Go and Google it, and then go and study Africa. Africa already has 4 major indicators of a superpower. I'm not talking fiction here. You go to Google and get your facts. Go and get, even when you go to Google, don't read blogs, please. Go and look at academic materials, academic papers that have been submitted. You see PDFs, you see works, you see surveys, you see what has been done over the years, and then you discover. For example, now Africa is the second largest population in the world. And you will know that population is one of the major indicators of a world power. And then you look at the most active workforce. You see that Africa has the highest workforce. We are talking about the youth force now. people between the age of 17 and 35. Africa has that. And then you discover some of the reasons why some people have been trying, to find a way to attack the population of Africa. Well, that is a discussion for another day. And so with this, I can tell you categorically, affirmatively, that yes, Africa will rise. As a matter of fact, it is no longer news that Africa will rise again. Africa is now at the verge of breakthrough. Africa is at the verge of breakthrough. The only things that seem to be stopping us now are the challenges of corruption, institutions, ineffective leadership. But these are being addressed, and they will be fully addressed in no time, I can assure you. And that is part of what this podcast will be doing. We are going to be looking at these issues and how we can tackle them and how we can proffer solutions that, actionable steps, strategies and principles that we can put in place and begin to surmount these challenges. And so I say to you, if you are listening to this, Africa is the next big thing. Get on the train. Become part of the movement for the rebuilding of Africa, so that when this is done, you will not, you will not just be a spectator. You will not be somebody hearing the story. You will be able to say, I was part of it. I was part of that movement. I joined the train. I did the work, and today we have made Africa. And let me tell you something. It is not going to be something that is going to happen in the next century. No, we are not looking at the next 100 years. In a matter of decades, 10, 20 years to now, you will see what is going to happen in Africa. You will see what is going to happen. Even as a result of this podcast that you are hearing now, you will see the movement that will begin to happen to Africa. To happen in Africa, and you will begin to see the changes and the growth in Africa. So once again, welcome to the movement of the rebuilding of Africa. See you in the next episode. Thank you.